The wasteland smelled of copper and burnt silica. The morning Vaeltar's fleet crossed the Terminator line, and humanity finally understood what it had been spared from for so long. Sergeant Mara Voss was not on duty when the sky cracked open. She was sitting on the lip of a drainage culvert outside Firebase Crestline, eating a protein block that tasted like compressed regret, watching the sun come up over the hardpan. The radio on her hip had been silent for 40 minutes. That was the first sign. The second sign was the light, not sunrise, too fast, too blue, too wide, spreading from horizon to horizon like something enormous had simply opened its eye. She didn't run. She'd learned long ago that running used up the best seconds. She keyed the radio instead. Crestline actual, this is Voss. You seeing this? The response was static, then a voice she didn't recognize. Voss, get inside right now. She was inside before the word now had finished. They called the alien vanguard the Nantari, a name humanity had assigned after the first contact recordings. A compression of phonemes that sounded vaguely like what their own language used for star hunters. The Nantari had no unified name for themselves. They were not unified. That was the part the briefing officers had struggled to convey before the briefing stopped happening entirely. The Nantari operated in castes. Each caste was defined by a discipline of combat that had been refined over centuries into something close to religion. The caste lords were called Kashin, and their hierarchy was astronomical. Each Kashin bore the name of a star, and the star they bore defined their rank, their role, their way of killing. The lowest-ranked Kashin held stars near the galactic rim, cold and dim. The highest held stars at the core, ancient, massive, burning with a gravity that bent light around them. The one they called Shin held the star of martyrdom. He was not the most powerful Kaishin. He was not the most feared. He was something the intelligence analysts had no proper word for. A Kishin who had defected from his own hierarchy, who had taken a fleet and an army and a city's worth of followers and carved out a domain in the contested space between the Nantari expansion wave and the human defensive perimeter. He was not humanity's ally. He was not its enemy. He was something worse, a sovereign obsession given warships and altitude. The obsession had a name. The analysts called it the Uria variable. The field soldiers called it other things. Mara Voss had her own scar. She hadn't chosen them. 7 of them. On her chest, in a rough arc that curved from her left collarbone down to her solar plexus and back up toward her right shoulder. They were smooth now, years old, the skin paler than the rest of her. 7 puncture wounds in a pattern that matched no human weapon because no human weapon had made them. She'd been 23. The Nantari advanced scout had been alone, separated from its unit, and had found her team's forward position by following the heat signatures of their cookfire. 4 humans and 1 alien. 3 of those humans had died before Voss had gotten to her feet. The 4th, Corporal Desh Alima, 19 years old, the kind of soldier who kept a folded paper crane in his breast pocket for luck, had thrown himself at the alien's back and bought Mara the 3 seconds she needed. The alien had turned from Desh and driven its fingertips into Mara's chest. Not claws, fingertips, precise as a surgeon. She felt each one go in. Not pain, exactly, more like a key entering a lock, a wrongness that her nervous system hadn't been built to describe. The alien had looked at her, its face unreadable as hammered metal, and then it had made a sound. Low, resonant, almost musical, not aggression, something older. It had left her alive. It had dragged Desh's body away. She never found out why it had left her, and she'd spent 4 years constructing explanations that felt increasingly flimsy the longer she survived. The scars had healed. The questions hadn't. She was a staff sergeant when the Shin situation was handed to her unit. Not because they were the best. She would be the first to say they weren't. But because they were the smallest, the most expendable, and the most familiar with the deep wasteland between the human perimeter and the Nantari forward zone. They knew the terrain. They knew the silences that meant something was feeding nearby, and the silences that meant something had already fed. The mission briefing was conducted by a colonel who'd never been past the wire in her life. The room smelled of recirculated air and anxiety sweat. The holographic display showed a planet, 3rd class, nominally habitable, currently inside contested space. Its name, per the Nantari designation system, translated loosely as Southern Cross. Shin controls the surface, the colonel said. Population, what's left of the indigenous group, is estimated at 12,000. Shin built them a city, infrastructure, water reclamation, food synthesis. It's the most livable settlement in the sector. And we're going in why? Asked Corporal Rafe, who was 22 and had the talent for asking the question everyone else was holding back. The colonel didn't answer immediately. She brought up a secondary file. The image on screen was a face. A woman, dark-haired, Nantari patterning along her jaw and temples, but unmistakably humanoid. The intelligence tag identified her as Yuria, designation, Goshase Ward, former prisoner of Shin, current status, location unknown. Her, the colonel said. She escaped Shin's compound 6 months ago. We believe she's still on or near Southern Cross. We believe Shin will do anything to recover her, including crossing our perimeter. Mara stared at the face on the screen. Something in it was familiar. Not the features, but the expression. She'd seen that expression before. On Deshalima's face the night before the alien found their camp. The look of someone who has already calculated the cost of what's coming and has chosen to pay it anyway. Why does he want her back so badly? She asked. The colonel paused. She's the reason he defected from the Nantari hierarchy. She's the reason he built Southern Cross. She's the reason his entire domain exists. A beat. She's also the reason it's been burning for the last 3 months. They inserted via drop pod 4 people and 2 weeks of supplies, landing 6 kilometers from Southern Cross in the dark. The pod hissed steam into the cold air as it buried itself in the hardpan. Mara climbed out first, rifle up, eyes adjusting to the twin-mooned sky. The city was visible even from 6 kilometers away. The fire was. The skyline glowed orange and amber, shot through with greens that meant Nantari energy systems venting uncontrolled. It looked less like a city under siege and more like a city being unmade from the inside. Rafe came up beside her. He was carrying more than his share of weight, a habit she'd learned not to argue with, and eating something from a foil pouch that he'd been nursing since the drop. He offered her the pouch. She took a single swallow and handed it back. The liquid was sweet, shockingly so, the kind of synthetic sweetness that had no right to exist in a war zone and was therefore precious. Looks like someone had a bad breakup, Rafe said. Quiet, she said, but not harshly. Their tech specialist, Adema, no relation to Desh, she'd asked, was already kneeling over a portable scanner, reading the electromagnetic scatter. The city's population is concentrated in the northeast quarter. The collapse zones are all south and central. Someone cleared them deliberately. Shin clearing out his own city, asked Brennan, their fourth, who rarely spoke, and when she did it mattered. Or, Adema said, someone cleared the city before Shin could fill it back up. The indigenous population of Southern Cross had no name for themselves, which the original survey teams had found unsettling, and which Mara found completely reasonable. Names were identities, and identities were targets. The survivors she found, huddled in the northeast quarter's subsurface networks, were thin and quiet, and watching with the particular wariness of people who had learned that anyone arriving with resources was also arriving with a bill. An elder, human elderly, one eye clouded with a cataract that nobody had bothered to treat, met her at the tunnel entrance. He looked at her scars, which were visible in the open collar of her field jacket, and he said something she didn't expect. You've met one of them before. Yes, and it let you live. Yes. He nodded slowly, as if this confirmed something. Shin did the same, left people alive, built around them. He gestured at the tunnels, the water pipes, the food synthesis units that still hummed with borrowed power. He built all this. We ate better under him than under anyone. And Yuria? Mara asked. Shifted, something compressed, like a fist tightening. She was kind, he said carefully. She spoke to us. Not at us. She asked our names. He paused. Nobody had asked our names in a long time. They found Yuria on the 4th day. She was in a sub-level room in what had been Shin's communications tower, still standing, still powered, the only intact structure in a 6-block radius of wreckage. She was not hiding. She was working, her hands moving over a console with a focused economy that Mara recognized as someone who has been doing this for a long time and expects to keep doing it until it's done. She heard them coming. She did not reach for a weapon. She turned instead, slowly, hands still in the air, and looked at Mara. She was taller than the photographs had suggested. The Nantari patterning on her face, bioluminescent geometric lines that the species used for identification the way humans used faces, was dim, almost faded, which Adema would later explain happened with stress and long-term fear suppression. Her eyes were the yellow gold that the intelligence files had flagged as rare even among her kind. She looked at Mara with those eyes, and what Mara saw in them was not hope, not relief, and not despair. She saw recognition. You have his marks, Yuria said. Her universal standard was accented but clear. Not Shin's, the old ones, the one who came before. Mara's hand moved involuntarily to her collar. I don't know what that means. You survived. Yuria tilted her head, something that carried a different weight in Nantari body language, reverence maybe, or acknowledgement. In my culture, survival of that kind is a sign. The one who made those marks on you was a Cation, a high one. He was testing.
Testing for what?
Yuria smiled, and it was a sad smile, the kind that had been built out of grief that had been carried long enough to stop being sharp, to see if you were someone worth remembering. They spent 2 days in the sublevel, waiting for Shin's patrols to thin enough for an extraction window. During that time, Mara learned things she hadn't expected to learn. Yuria had not escaped Shin's compound. She had walked out. Shin had let her. He had known that she could not stay, that the violence being done in his name in the sectors around Southern Cross was something she could not survive being complicit in, and he had left the passage clear and pretended not to notice. He had done this quietly, without theatrics, without extracting from her a promise to come back. He built this city for me, Yuria said on the second night, sitting with her back against the cool metal wall while Rafe kept watch at the tunnel entrance. Every structure placed the way I would have placed it. The water distribution, the design is from my homeworld. The food synthesis units use the flavor profiles of our native grain. She looked at her hands. He tried to build me a memory, a home that felt like mine. And it didn't work, Mara said. It worked perfectly, Yuria said. That was the problem. He understood me well enough to build exactly what would remind me of everything I had lost. Every morning I woke up, I was mourning and comfortable at the same time. He thought he was offering me peace. She paused. He was offering me beautiful, very comfortable grief. Mara thought about that. And the people in this city? They were supposed to benefit from everything he'd given me. They did. They ate well. They were safe from the wars. Her voice quieted. They never consented to be a demonstration. Nobody asked them. On the third day, Shin came, not to take her back. That was what Mara had expected. The siege, the overwhelming force, the negotiation with humanity's soldiers as impediment or bargaining chip. Instead, one Nantari lord, alone, on foot, walking across the hardpan toward the communications tower with no weapons visible and no escort and no ships overhead. Mara watched him approach through the tower's ground-level windows. She had seen Nantari warriors before. She had seen Cation at a distance, once, through surveillance feeds, and they had the quality of something too large for the camera to properly contain. Shin was different. He was large, tall, heavily built, with the banded muscle structure of upper-caste Nantari, but he moved without the predatory deliberateness she'd expected. He moved the way very tired things move. He moved like a man who has been carrying something heavy for a long time and has not yet decided if he's going to set it down. He's not here for a fight, Rafe said beside her. No, Mara agreed. He's not. Yuria had already moved to the window. She was looking at Shin with an expression that Mara had no word for. Not love, not anger, not pity. Something that contained all three and had boiled down to something more fundamental. Reckoning. Go out to him? Mara asked. I have to. Yuria didn't move yet. He deserves to hear it from me, not through a closed door. Mara went with her. Not to protect her. Shin could have killed 3 more of her in the time it would take to draw a sidearm, and she knew it. She went because somebody should witness, and because she understood, in a way she couldn't entirely articulate, that this was one of those moments that needed a witness who wasn't involved. History needed its bystanders. Shin stopped 10 meters from the tower entrance. His eyes moved to Yuria, and for a moment the exhaustion in his face became something else. Acute, raw, brief. Then it settled back. You came back, he said. I never left. Yuria's voice was steady. I'm still inside everything you built. That's the problem. He made a sound, low and resonant, that Mara's translation unit couldn't parse. Too much tonal nuance. Too many embedded meanings. He looked at Mara then. She expected contempt. She expected the cold assessment of a superior organism calculating threat. Instead, he looked at her the way you look at someone who was in a place where you were young and are now standing in it older. A coincidence of geography and time that means nothing and somehow means something. His eyes found her scars. He stilled. Who made those? He asked. I don't know his designation, she said. He was old, tested me and left. Shin was quiet for a moment. Kaio, he said quietly. Those are Kaio's marks. He was my master's master. He looked at her face. He thought you were worth remembering. He was right. She didn't answer. There was nothing to say. Shin and Yuria spoke for a long time in their own language, off to the side, and Mara stayed by the tower entrance and didn't listen. She watched the sky instead, the twin moons, the strange blue-shifted stars, the distant flicker of Shin's ships in geosynchronous orbit, holding position and doing nothing, loyal to a command they were probably no longer going to receive. When Yuria came back, her face was different, quieter. The grief was still there, but it had stopped pressing against the surface. "What did you tell him?" Mara asked. "That he was never wrong about what I needed," Yuria said. "Only about his right to decide when and how and at what cost to others." She glanced back once to where Shin was still standing. He knew that. He knew it when he built this city. He told himself it was a gift. A long breath. It was a monument to his idea of me, not to me. "Did he hear you?" "Yes." She said it without anger, without vindication. "He's been hearing me since the beginning. That was never the problem." The extraction was scheduled for 3030 the following day. A human shuttle, fast and quiet, VTOL on the flat hardpan north of the city where Shin's sensors would have a gap in coverage. Mara had worked the gap from the intel files. It was real. Whether Shin had chosen not to close it or had simply never gotten around to it was a question with different answers depending on what you believed about him. She was running a final check of the route when Brennan tapped her shoulder. "Patrol," Brennan said. "South." "But not Shin's." Mara checked the scanner. Nantari signatures, yes, but the electromagnetic pattern was wrong for Shin's forces. Different harmonic, different formation. She'd seen this pattern in the intelligence files. It belonged to the Nantari Vanguard, the actual invasion force, the one that Shin's defection had kept outside the contested space for 3 years, buying humanity time it had used very poorly. "They're not here for us," Adema said, already reading the vector. "They're here for him." The politics came clear, fast, and cold. Shin had been the obstacle. Shin had held this sector against the Vanguard's advance with his independent force, not out of loyalty to humanity, but because Southern Cross was his, and he did not share what was his. With Shin compromised, defected from, isolated, his command structure uncertain, the Vanguard had read the opening. They'd sent 12 ships. Shin had 3. Rafe found her at the tunnel entrance, watching the sky where the Nantari Vanguard signatures were brightening, descending toward the outer atmosphere. He stood beside her for a while without speaking. Then, "We can't help him. I know. He's not our problem. I know that too." A long pause. "But you're going to do something stupid." "Probably," she admitted. What she did was find Shin, who had moved to the northern edge of the hardpan, and was watching the descending ships with the stillness of a man who has already completed all his calculations and doesn't like any of the answers. She walked up beside him, without ceremony, without preamble, because there wasn't time for either. "They're coming for you," she said. "Yes, you're 3 ships against their 12. That is the situation, yes?" She looked at the sky. "We have a shuttle inbound, human craft. The Vanguard won't have its full sensor capability inside atmosphere yet. There's a 40-minute window before they achieve full coverage of the surface. That window is also exactly when our shuttle arrives." She paused. "Our shuttle has a transponder signature that broadcasts as neutral freight, the kind that gets waved through Vanguard formations without inspection, because inspecting neutral freight slows down invasion timetables." Shin looked at her. "You're proposing to use your shuttle as a decoy. I'm proposing that our shuttle will fly its scheduled route, which happens to take it through a gap in the Vanguard descent formation, and that in the confusion of its passage, 3 small ships running silent might find it easier to reposition." She paused. "And that separately, during the same window, Yuria and my team will be aboard, said shuttle heading to human space, which is where we were always going. Silence." The ships overhead were becoming visible now, catching the moonlight. 12 points of light, organized, deliberate, patient. "This benefits you," Shin said slowly. "Yuria leaves. You complete your mission. It also gives you a fighting chance," she said. "You didn't have to let her go. You left the path clear." She looked at him. "I've been trying to figure out the right word for what that was." He said nothing. "I don't have one," she admitted. "In my experience, people who love something that can't love them back generally find ways to punish it for that. You built it a city instead." She shrugged. Her left shoulder, the one without a scar directly above it. "That's worth something. I don't know exactly what, but something." He was quiet for a long time. The ships above were close enough now to see their navigation lights. "In my culture," he said finally, "there is a concept. Nantoketsu, the final count." He touched his own chest briefly, a gesture she didn't fully understand. "It is the moment when the sum of your choices becomes legible, when you can see what you've been building all along." A pause. "I see mine. What does it look like?" Honest, he said. Not sad, not proud, just honest. The shuttle was on time. It came in under the radar floor, low and fast, and the Vanguard formation sensors swept over it and categorized it correctly. Neutral freight, commercial transponder, human flagged, low threat priority. 12 ships busy with a descent pattern. Don't divert for neutral freight. Not in the first 40 minutes. Mara had Yuria and her team aboard in 11. She watched from the loading ramp as the shuttle lifted. Below, Shin's 3 ships were moving. Not in the direction she'd expected. Not retreating. Not running. Moving toward the Vanguard formation, finding the channel that the shuttle's passage had lit up in their sensors like a briefly open door. Not an escape route. A counter. 3 against 12. She did the math and didn't like it. Then she did different math, the kind that accounted for the fact that Shin had held this sector for 3 years against an opponent that had rolled through 17 other defended systems in the same period. The kind of math that accounted for what you could do when you had nothing left to protect, and therefore nothing left to be careful about. She didn't watch the outcome. The ramp sealed. The shuttle burned hard for orbit. Yuria sat across from her in the cargo hold, strapped into the jump seats along the wall, the rest of the team between them. Rafe was already asleep, the talent of a soldier, sleep anywhere immediately, without transition. Adema was running post-mission checks on her equipment. Brennan was looking at the ceiling. Yuria was looking at Mara. You didn't have to do that, she said. He made it easy, Mara said. He already left the door open. I just walked through it. Yuria looked at her hands. He always left the door open. Every door. He built walls on all sides and then left every door open because he always knew, that I would not stay in a place I had not chosen. She paused. He thought if the city was beautiful enough, I would choose it. Maybe you would have, Mara said, if he'd built it smaller. If he'd built it without the army, without the conquest, without the cost. Yes. The word was soft. Yes, exactly. She lifted her eyes. He loved me with everything he had. All of it. He gave me everything he had. And what he had was enormous and terrible, and it was all I could see. Mara didn't say anything. What was there to say? She'd met men like that. Not Nantari lords, not interstellar warlords with 3 ships and a burning city, but men who had loved like that, completely, without remainder, without the capacity to hold anything back, and in the totality of it, had consumed the thing they loved, because love wasn't something you could give at full force without burning the recipient. She thought about Deshalima. The paper crane. The 3 seconds he'd bought her. He hadn't done it for love. They'd barely known each other. 6 weeks in the same unit. He'd done it because it was the right move and he'd seen it before she had. Clean. Simple. Unrequest. She'd have given every beautiful, terrible, overwhelming love in the universe for one more of those 3 seconds. They hit human space 9 hours later. The debriefing took 3 days. Yuria was separated from Mara's team and taken to a diplomatic holding facility that Mara was told was comfortable, which she chose to believe. Her team was cycled through medical, intelligence review, and the bureaucratic rituals of soldiers returning from somewhere they weren't supposed to be. On the 4th day, Mara was sitting in a mess hall on Firebase Alcyone, eating something warm that was supposed to be noodles, and mostly was, when Adema sat down across from her. Southern Cross, Adema said. The battle. I don't have clearance for the debrief yet. It's not classified. It was in the open observation sector. Adema put her tablet on the table and turned it to face Mara. 3 ships against 12. The 3 didn't win. They weren't supposed to. A pause. But they bought 17 hours before the Vanguard could establish surface control. In those 17 hours, the indigenous population in the northeast quarter evacuated through the subsurface network to the landing zone on the far side of the hardpan. 12,000 people. Mara looked at the tablet. The data was there. Sensor sweeps, population movement, the Vanguard's frustrated attempts to establish a perimeter around a city that kept producing civilians from impossible angles. He'd already evacuated them, she said, before the fight. That's why the city was burning in the south. He was clearing the routes. Yes. Adema picked up her tablet. He knew he was going to lose. He used the time he had to make sure the people in the city had somewhere to go. She stood. Thought you should know. She left. Mara sat with her noodles. She went to see Yuria before the diplomatic process moved her somewhere Mara wouldn't have access. The holding facility was comfortable, as promised, not opulent, but real windows, real light, a garden that someone had planted with native species and was tending with visible care. Yuria was in the garden when Mara found her. I heard about Southern Cross, Mara said. I know. Yuria didn't stop what she was doing. She was kneeling beside a low plant with pale leaves, clearing debris from around its base with careful hands. He told me he would. He told you when we spoke, before you left. She sat back on her heels. He said, I cannot make you stay. I cannot make you choose what I built. But I can choose now what it was built for. She looked at the pale plant. He said, let it mean what I should have meant from the beginning, not a monument. A city. Mara sat down on the edge of a raised bed not far from her. The garden was quiet. Somewhere nearby, birds were doing what birds do in the morning, indifferent to everything that had happened in the previous 2 weeks. The 7 scars, Mara said. You said the one who made mine was testing. Yes. What was he testing for? Yuria was quiet for a moment. In Nantari martial tradition, when a high Kaishin encounters a being whose internal energy, what we call the Seiki, has a resonance worth noting, they mark it. Not to wound, to remember. She touched her own jaw, where the bioluminescent patterning ran. We mark what we intend to carry forward. What we believe will matter. He didn't know me, Mara said. He met me for 30 seconds. He killed 3 of my team. Yes, Yuria said simply, and he chose to mark you rather than kill you. In my culture, that is a statement of enormous consequence. It means you are the kind of thing that should continue. She looked at Mara directly. I don't expect you to find that comforting. I don't, Mara agreed, but you're still carrying it. 7 years later, a pause. The ones it was meant for always do. They gave Mara a commendation she didn't ask for. They gave her team rotational leave. Rafe spent his at a beach on the coastal station, reported back tan and obscurely satisfied. Adema visited her family in the interior settlements. Brennan did not report her leave activities and was not asked. Mara spent hers at Firebase Crestline, where she'd been sitting on a drainage culvert the morning the sky cracked open. The Firebase was different now. Expanded, reinforced, no longer the forward observation post it had been. The hardpan where she'd watched the blue light spread was an equipment yard now. The culvert was still there. She sat on it, ate a protein block, watched the sun come up. On her tablet, a message had arrived from the diplomatic processing facility, forwarded through 3 levels of clearance. Yuria had accepted provisional humanitarian status in human space and had been assigned to a xenological advisory role with the Interspecies Relations Bureau. The message was informational, not requesting a response. There was a second message, a personal addendum that had been attached to the official one and flagged as non-classified. It was from Yuria directly, 3 sentences. I have been told that humans have a tradition of naming the stars. I have been told the pattern of your scars matches a known constellation. I thought you should know its name in case you didn't. The name was there. She read it. She'd known, somewhere, that she'd already known. Had known it in the way you know something that has been true for years before you have the language for it. She ran her fingers across the scar arc, left to right 7 points. North Star, the Dipper, the constellation that people had used for 10,000 years to find north, to navigate, to hold position in the dark. She finished. The protein block. The sun cleared the horizon. The hardpan lit up red, gold, and long. She wasn't sure what to do with being someone worth remembering. She wasn't sure anyone ever was. She got up and went back inside. There was a lot of work left to do.